Hey, this is Jeff, the Souring Gentleman. As liberal as I am, I can understand how some people would like Trump. I'm going to hash through some of those points a little bit later in this episode, but I've been talking to some buddies of mine about possible futures for the United States, and I feel like they probably see me as an alarmist, though I see it from a perspective more of preparedness than alarmism. And to me, they seem a bit lax about the topic of civil conflict, but I think, as I mentioned in a previous podcast, I think they're just having a difficult time conceptualizing what civil conflict in 2022 would look like. And when I say civil conflict or civil war, I don't mean that we would see something like what we're seeing in Ukraine right now. It would be nothing like that. When I say civil conflict, as I mentioned before, I mean more like what we saw in Ireland with the Troubles. And it doesn't take a major sticking point like it did with the fight against slavery or even an insurrection like we've already seen in the last couple of years. And basically, all this would look like is domestic terrorism, or more domestic terrorism than what we're seeing right now. But we've seen an insurrection on the Capitol to try and stop our democratic tradition by attempting to force Mike Pence to stop the certification of our votes. And we see it when we watch 20 to 30 neo-Nazis pulled from a box truck at a gay pride event in Idaho. And we see it when we watch a gunman walk into a grocery store and gun down blacks. And we know his intentions because he wrote a manifesto that he published online. But this is domestic terrorism, there is no doubt. And all it's going to take is Trump being held to account for his misdeeds with the 2020 election. If you indict Trump, you are going to see these groups organized for larger scale events. There is no way around it. Even though most Republican voters would prefer DeSantis over Trump, according to new polls, if Trump is indicted, his supporters will surface, just like they did on January 6th. But where will they focus their attention this time? Maybe someplace like the Democratic National Committee headquarters. Maybe the homes of what they perceive as rhinos or Democratic senators. I mean, have you seen the ad for Eric Greitens where he said it was rhino hunting season? Have you seen Pastor Mark Burns while he was running for South Carolina's 4th congressional seat where he said everyone in the LGBTQ plus movement should be executed for treason? These people are calling for violence. One man at a conference asked Charlie Kirk about the quote-unquote stolen elections. He said, "We're living under corporate and medical fascism. This is tyranny. When do we get to use the guns?" Well, luckily, Kirk had his wits about him and he condemned the call to violence, saying we should exhaust all possible peaceful options before we resort to violence. But when this question was asked, the crowd cheered for the idea that they could finally take up arms against Democrats. We are not as safe as most people think. We're on the edge. I mean, Christ, we had 190 Republicans in the House vote against birth control. They voted against codifying birth control. 190 Republicans don't think people should have access to birth control. And these congressmen and women, many of these Republicans are in states where abortion is already illegal. They're legislating with their religion. They want sex to be used for procreation only. And we were told that rape and incest are less than 1% of the abortions that are administered here in the US, but it only took, less than 2 weeks to find a case of a 10-year-old who would have been forced to carry a baby full term if the Republicans had had their way? That surely would have killed the 10-year-old child or the baby or both. And there are women right now who have miscarried, but they have to carry their dead fetuses for weeks because they can't get an abortion. And they have to make arrangements to go out of state. This whole thing is a clusterfuck. I was trying not to swear during this episode, but I guess adult themes go with adult language, so if it's a problem for you, figure it out. I can't imagine I have any Trump supporters listening this far, but I do see what they like about Trump. Like, if you put yourself in that mindset, I can understand why they would like Trump. The MAGA, Make America Great Again, that repeated slogan to return the U.S. to a better time. He was abrupt and tough on crime, pushing for longer sentences and trying to stop protesters with arrests before they fell into chaos. He was tough on illegal immigrants, and he flared up patriotism in the U.S. with calls for stronger borders. His love for the military and working to keep the military as an endeared concept in the eyes of Americans. He was against abortion, and he sided with the call for conventional marriage between a man and a woman. So if you're religious, I can absolutely understand why you would want to support Trump. He didn't cater to the media, and he called them out as liars when they were being less than truthful. He wouldn't even answer to some reporters who looked like they were pushing an agenda. Again, he was tough on national security, and border security is a part of that. He was accepted by religious leaders, and he was prophesied over as a delegated authority by God. He pushed back against culture issues that biblical fundamentalists oppose, like trans rights, gay marriage, and the like. He boosted up the economy by protecting corporations to allow them to freely do business here in the U.S. with the intent of working together for a mutual beneficial business-government relationship. He also worked with corporations to help them streamline their organizations, keeping a minimum of labor unions, thereby increasing profits and bolstering the economy. If you're on the right, I can see how these things would appeal. Trump was realistic on the need for higher education, trying to tap into an existing labor pool that could do manufacturing jobs with minimal education and lock her up. Trump did not mince words when it came to crime and punishment, and he made sure to remain vocal if he sensed a need for investigation somewhere. And he knew how to drain the swamp, and he appointed people to positions of power who he knew most of the time personally, so he was sure to keep people around him that he could trust. And accusations of fraudulent elections, he would not stay quiet when he perceived that 2020 election as a quote-unquote stolen election. So those are the points that I can, like some people, I can understand why you would like Trump so much, but these are actually the 14 components of fascism. And Trump ticks every box if you're assessing him for fascistic tendencies. And he's not even the biggest problem here. The biggest problem is that we could get DeSantis as president. He would surely tick several of these boxes himself. We know this because of how he's running the state of Florida. There are some people who clamor onto these types of ideals, and we need to be voting against these people. And so when you have an organization like Antifa, which stands for anti-fascists, and you know that Nazis were fascists, doesn't it make sense then that Antifa would be against the ideals that Trump had in place, knowing that these are the 14 characteristics of fascism? I can't emphasize this enough. 190 Republicans voted to take away your birth control. How far will they really go if they win these midterm elections? With a Republican House and Senate, and with someone like DeSantis or Trump in the White House, I wonder if we ever get our country back.